students. Today's topic is ocular pharmacology. So we have to know the various methods of drug delivery in the eyes. We can either give a drug by the topical route, which means we are giving it via eye drops or in the form of an ointment or gel, or we can give it as periocular and intraocular injections. So in periocular injections we can either give it subconjunctivally or by a subtenon route or peribulbar or retroorbital route, and in the intraocular route we can give it via intracameral injection, where we give the injection directly into the anterior chamber of the eye and also intravitreally into the vitreous cavity directly. And the other method is the systemic route, which means we are giving it via tablets, that is the oral route, and intravenous injections and intramuscular injections. Now in short, we have to know the various factors which influence the local drug penetration into the eye. So first and foremost is the drug concentration. So higher the drug concentration, better will be the penetration. And we can also add various substances like methyl cellulose and polyvinyl alcohol to increase the drug viscosity, which actually increases the contact time with the cornea. Next is the lipid solubility, because more lipid soluble the drug, more is the absorption into the eye. Next is by adding surfactants like benzalkonium and thiamarcin, we can increase the drug penetration, which cause the alteration in the cell membranes in the cornea. And we should keep the pH of the drug close to 7.4, because if the drug pH is different from this, either higher or lower, it might cause ocular irritation and watering. And next is the molecular weight and size. So more the molecular weight and size, lesser will be the penetration. So we should keep the molecular weight within optimal range. So first, starting with the topical route, that means the eye drops. So we have to keep this in mind, that one drop that we are giving is equal to approximately 50 microliter, and the conjunctival sac capacity is just a maximal of 13 microliter. So even one drop is more than sufficient. So we at a time we shouldn't give more than one drops, because the rest will get wasted. So what is the method of instilling a topical drop? We hold the skin below the lower lid, pull the lower lid forwards and instill one drop, not more than that. And what are the various methods of increasing the drug absorption? We should at least wait for 5 to 10 minutes between two different drops, and after giving the drop we should ask the patient to keep the eyes closed for at least 5 minutes, and also compress the lacrimal sac. Next, coming to the ointments. So these increase the contact time of the ocular drug, because it is of lipid based and it is more viscous, but it has got a disadvantage of visual blurring. So this is how we are giving the ointment. We pull the lower lid forward and put the ointment. Next, coming to the periocular injections. So we are directly reaching behind the iris lens diaphragm, so the absorption will be better than the topical application. And like I had said, it can be given either subconjunctivally, subtenon, peribulbar or retrobulbar. So as we are bypassing the epithelial barriers of conjunctiva and cornea, so even the drugs which have got low lipid solubility shall have a better absorption if given through the periocular injection route. And steroids and the local anesthesia that we give during cataract surgery and other eye surgeries are also given via the periocular route, specifically the peribulbar route. So a little something about the subconjunctival route. Just I have said, they penetrate directly via the sclera and achieve a higher concentration. And the subtenon injections can either be anterior subtenon or posterior subtenon. In anterior subtenon, we are giving it for the diseases which are anteriorly placed to the lens, and posterior subtenon are for the diseases related to the retina, vitreous. And next is the retrobulbar injection, which are not given widely, More commonly, we use the peribulbar injection used to give the lignocaine anesthesia during cataract surgery. So this is a diagram which shows the method of giving a posterior subtenon injection. We give it superiorly. Next is the intraocular injection. First is the intracameral route, which are given during cataract surgery, and the intravitreal antibiotics are given in cases of endophthalmitis, and also steroid is given in cases of macular edema, and for diabetic retinopathy we can give anti-VEGF injections intravitreally. So here in this diagram we can see that the needle is directly reaching the vitreous cavity. Now these are the common ocular drugs that we need to study. The most important being the antibacterials. They can come under the various groups like penicillin, cephalosporin, sulfonamides, aminoglycosides, vancomycin. So coming to the antibiotics, so they are used topically both pre and post operatively for bacterial infections, and we can also use them orally for the treatment of various diseases like preseptal cellulitis like amoxicillin and clavulanate, and given intravenously for the treatment of orbital cellulitis, and we can also give them intravitreally for the treatment of endophthalmitis. So the first picture shows a patient having bacterial endophthalmitis. In this case we can give the intravitreal antibiotics, while the second picture shows a patient of orbital cellulitis where we can give both the oral or the intravenous route. Now the next group is the sulfonamides. In the mechanism of action we should just know that these act by preventing the synthesis of folate in the bacteria, which kills the bacteria, and it is used in several conditions like trachoma, inclusion conjunctivitis and toxoplasmosis. So this third picture is of toxoplasmosis. We can see a picture of the retina. So it's basically a retinal affection, and the middle picture is of inclusion conjunctivitis, and the third picture is of chlamydia. Now next group is the cephalosporins. So there are various generations of cephalosporins, first to fifth, and they are actually bactericidal, meaning they can actually kill the bacteria by disrupting the formation of the cell wall. You don't need to remember all the names, just you should remember that the first generation cephalosporins act against the gram positive cocci like cefazolin, and the second generation act against the gram negative ones and against staphylococcus, they are cefuroxime, and the third generation are more active towards the gram negative bacilli, they are the ceftriaxone, and they have several side effects like allergic reaction, neutropenia and thrombocytopenia. Next is the aminoglycoside group. So they act by in preventing the protein synthesis of the bacteria, and they are mainly active against the gram negative bacilli. So we use tobramycin for Pseudomonas, gentamicin 0.3% eye drop. These percentages are important, you should remember this, and neomycin 0.3 to 0.5% eye drop. So tetracycline is active against some fungi, chlamydia, and both gram negative and gram positive bacteria. Chloramphenicol is actually bacteriostatic, meaning it doesn't totally kill the bacteria, just stunts the growth of the bacteria. It has got a similar spectrum of action. And now these are the various diseases that can be treated by antibiotics. So trachoma can be treated by either topical or systemic tetracycline or erythromycin, and bacterial keratitis, meaning the bacterial corneal ulcers, can be treated by 45 penicillin, cephalosporin, aminoglycoside, and bacterial conjunctivitis is treated by, it doesn't actually need treatment always, but in cases which are not resolving, we can treat them with topical erythromycin and aminoglycoside fluoroquinolones. Now next is a very important subgroup is the antivirals. So in the antivirals, the most important is the acyclovir. We get it in the form of ointment, that is the 3% ointment. The dosage is it should be given 5 times a day for at least 2 weeks, and the oral dose is 800 milligram. In the it should also be taken for 5 times and for maximum of 2 weeks. And also we can give it in the through the intravenous route for herpes zoster retinitis. Among the other antivirals, ganciclovir is used, and like I had said, the indications are for viral corneal ulcers and viral uveitis. So this is a picture of the retina. The fundus picture shows a cytomegaloviral retinitis. In this case, we have to give the intravitreal acyclovir. Now is the dendritic ulcer seen on the cornea. Next, coming to the antifungal drugs. So they are used in fungal corneal ulcers and also in fungal retinitis and endophthalmitis. And the commonly used drugs are polyenes and imidazoles. So the polyenes act by damaging the cell membrane of the susceptible fungi, and the examples are amphotericin B and natamycin. But they are toxic to the kidney, so should be used judiciously and should not be given in patients of liver disease of kidney disease. Next is the imidazoles. So they increase the cell wall permeability, and examples are miconazole, ketoconazole. These are also toxic to the kidney. Another is flucytosine, and they act by inhibiting the DNA synthesis. So these are the pictures of a fungal ulcer. We can see the thick white affection of the cornea. They can be treated by these antifungal drugs that you saw. Next are the drugs which are very commonly used in the refraction room. They are the mydriatics and cycloplegics. So the mydriatics, what they do, they actually dilate the pupil by constricting the dilator sphincter, the dilator pupillae muscles, and which are under the sympathetic supply, and the example is phenylephrine. Another is the cycloplegic, which cause cycloplegia. They are under the parasympathetic control. While classifying, we can classify them as short acting, like tropicamide, which has an action for just 4 to 6 hours, or intermediate acting or fomatropine, which remain active for about 24 hours, and the long acting atropine, which has action for about 2 weeks. And they can also be used for corneal ulcer to relieve the pain of the corneal ulcer, and also to reduce the secretions of uveitis, and also obviously for the cycloplegic refraction. Next is a very important group of drugs that you need to study. Those are the anti-glaucoma drugs. So they can either be the beta blockers, which are widely used, which are selective, meaning they act on only specific receptors, beta receptors. Example is betaxolol. Or they can be non-selective, which acts on all kinds of receptors. So they the most important being timolol. So how do they act? No, they reduce the aqueous humor protection and thus reduces the IOP. In the side effects, we have to remember that they have an effect on heart. So they cause bradycardia, which means they decrease the heart rate. They might cause sweating and anxiety. And in the eye, it can cause irritation, frontal headache, can give rise to iris cysts, and also give rise to follicular conjunctivitis. Next is the carbonic anhydrase inhibitors. It can be given either as tablet acetazolamide or topical in the form of dorzolamide or brinzolamide tablets. And the mechanism of action is they also reduce the aqueous humor formation, thus reducing the IOP. The side effects are paresthesia. The patients will complain of tingling sensations in hand and feet. The patient might have to go to the bathroom more than once. It means it causes frequent urination, GI disturbances, and decrease in the blood potassium levels, that is the hypokalemia. Next is the hyperosmotic agents. So in that we have mannitol. which is given when only when the IOP is very high, like in the range of 60 to 70 millimeter of mercury, and in adults the dose is 0.2 gram per kg of body weight. The next group is prostaglandins. The examples are latanoprost, carboprost, and they don't reduce the secretion of the aqueous, rather they increase the aqueous outflow of the aqueous, so that the aqueous easily gets drained away from the eye, thus reducing the IOP. But they have side effects like conjunctival redness and iris and pediocular pigmentation, hypertrichosis, means the number of eyelashes will increase, and also the darkening of the iris. Next is the anti-inflammatory drugs that you need to know a little bit of. So they can either be corticosteroids or NSAIDs, meaning non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. So how do the corticosteroid act? Now the corticosteroid prevent the conversion of phospholipids to arachidonic acid, and the NSAIDs, how do they act? They prevent the cyclooxygenase pathway, thus preventing the formation of prostaglandins. These prostaglandins are mediators of the inflammation. So if we reduce the prostaglandins, our inflammatory process will get resolved. So in the corticosteroids, they can either be short acting, intermediate acting and long acting. In the short acting ones, we have hydrocortisone, cortisone and prednisolone. This prednisolone is widely used in the form of eye drops or tablets also. And in the intermediate acting, we have the triamcinolone and fluprednisolone. And in the long acting, we have dexamethasone, betamethasone. These are normally given in the form of injections in the eye. So these are the various indications. First is the topically they can be given in cases of allergic conjunctivitis, scleritis, uveitis, keratitis, and during or after ocular surgeries. And systemically, meaning they can be given directly inside the eye via injections or via tablets, and they can be used in cases of posterior uveitis, optic neuritis, and also after the conjunctival graft, the corneal graft rejection. But we have to keep one thing in mind, that if there is an active infection in the patient, the steroid should not be given, as it will cause more flare up of the infection. So this child is showing allergic conjunctivitis. We can see that the eyes are swollen and red, and in this case topical steroids or NSAIDs can be given. And episcleritis, similarly we can see localized congestion in the lateral aspect of the eye. So they respond good to NSAIDs and the steroids. And the last picture is of anterior uveitis. So here we should give steroids. So prednisolone is usually what we give in cases of acute anterior uveitis. Now what are the contraindications? Like I had said, in any cases of infection we shouldn't give it, as it will cause flare up of the infection. So if the patient is having fungal keratitis or herpetic, that meaning the viral keratitis, we shouldn't give it. And if the patient is having high IOP, meaning he is a patient of glaucoma, we shouldn't give it, because it causes an increase of the IOP. And in the systemic contraindication include if the patient is suffering from diabetes mellitus or has some heart failure, renal failure, peptic ulcer or osteoporosis. Steroid will aggravate these conditions. Coming to the side effects, the ocular side effects, like I had said, it can cause increase in IOP, so the patient might develop glaucoma, and it may cause opacification of lens causing cataract. And like in infection I had said, it can cause activation of infection and can delay the wound healing. So this is the picture of a patient who has instilled steroid drops and eaten steroid medications, and he has come up with the opacification of lens. So he has developed a cataract. And this is a picture of a glaucoma cup. So this is what we see when we do a direct ophthalmoscopy. In cases of glaucoma patient, we can find a increased cup disc ratio. So what are the things we should keep in mind, we should look for before prescribing a steroid is, we should note the BP, If the blood pressure is too high, we shouldn't give steroids. If the blood sugar is too high, if the patient is diabetic, steroids should be avoided. And Bantu test and chest X-ray are for ruling out tuberculosis. In cases of TB patients, we should try to avoid steroids, and we should do a blood examination for total count, direct count, differential count, and ESR. Now these are the NSAIDs. So the NSAIDs which are given as topical drops are flurbiprofen, indomethacin, and ketorolac, and the indications are episcleritis and scleritis, uveitis, macular edema, and also it can be given before the cataract surgery so that the dilatation of the pupil is maintained for a longer time. And the preservative can be used like that. So these are the list of the various preparations. You should at least remember the percentages of nebafenac, ketorolac, and systemically the NSAIDs can be either paracetamol, which we take very frequently for headaches, and diclofenac, acyclofenac, ketorolac, ibuprofen. So the next group is the ocular lubricants. So what are the indications? So it is indicated in dry eye where the normal tear secretion of the patient is very low, and also any cases of any disease that cause ocular irritation. You don't need to know the trade names, you just know that the main thing that is given in the ocular lubricants is carboxymethyl cellulose. Next is the ocular diagnostic drugs, which means the drugs which are used to diagnose certain conditions. The most commonly used diagnostic drug is fluorescein dye, which is available in the form of sodium salt. So it is used to stain the corneal aberrations during applanation tonometry, and we can also detect a corneal wound leak, the NLD obstruction, and also diagnose the various retinal disorders via fluorescein angiography. But we should keep it in mind that if a patient is wearing a contact lens, we should ask him or her to remove the contact lens before we give this dye, as it might stain the soft contact lens. And since the fluorescent drops are greenish, the pseudomonas colonies are also greenish. So the fluorescent drops can be contaminated by the pseudomonas and we won't get to know. So it should be kept in mind that pseudomonas infection can be present. So we should only use fresh fluorescent drops every time. So in the first picture we can see that there is a corneal ulcer, an epithelial defect that is stained green by the cornea. When we see the same cornea under a blue light, we can see that the epithelial defect has turned green, and we can more easily see the epithelial defect and can assess the size and shape and the degree of healing. And the second picture is a fundus picture, means the fluorescent dye has been given during fluorescent angiography, and it has delineated all the retinal blood vessels. Now the other ocular diagnostic drug is rose Bengal stain. It stains the devitalized epithelium, and it is used in cases of severe dry eye and also for diagnosing herpetic keratitis. Next is the local anesthetics. So local anesthetics we use during the cataract surgeries locally. If we are doing a phacoemulsification, in most of the times we use the topical anesthetic drops only, of which proparacaine and tetracaine is very important. And it can also be used during applanation tonometry to see the IOP, gonioscopy to see the angle of the eye, and during removal of the corneal foreign bodies in the OPD, removal of sutures, or the examination of patients who cannot open the eyes because of pain in cases of ulcer or uveitis. Now the adverse effects is they might be toxic to the corneal epithelium, so we shouldn't overuse it, or it might rarely give rise to allergic reactions. Now the local anesthesia given in the injection form is the most common is the perivalvular block that we give in the OTs during cataract surgery, mainly small incision cataract surgery. So the main goal is to achieve anesthesia, means the patient shouldn't feel any pain, and akinesia, that is the patient shouldn't be able to move his or her eye. during the intraocular surgery. So the drugs given are lidocaine 2% and bupivacaine 0.5%. So this is how we give an orbital infiltration. In the first picture, we are seeing that the needle is used. It should be a 26 gauge ideally needle. In the lower part, the injection is given between the medial 2/3 and the lateral 2/3 of the eye, and it should be diagonally opposite in the upper lid. It should be at the junction of the medial 1/3 and lateral 2/3. So the injection that we given goes to the periorbital space, the peribulbar space, and the patient achieves anesthesia and apyneusia. Thank you.